In the Hugo mansion, a young lady lay asleep, looking almost like a fairy tale beauty resting in the woods. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open. She bolted upright, rushed straight to the dining area, and loudly called for everyone's attention. Once the room fell silent, she made an announcement. She described herself as the most talented mage ever to enter and graduate from the Academy's Department of Magical Arts. The Countess, who had earned her title through outstanding service to the Empire, the young woman with 3 billion gold pieces in personal assets, and the leading contender for the next head of the Magic Tower. An achievement that outshone even the face that had earned her the title of Academy Goddess. She then declared that she, Arasilla Hugo, was getting married, and that Captain Vandermeer would be her betrothed. Her family stared at her in complete shock. Arasilla Hugo's eccentricity was well known throughout the Empire, but even for her family, this was unexpected. Only 3 years earlier, during a similar family dinner, she had boldly declared that she would never marry and intended to bury her bones in the Magic Tower, insisting nothing could change her mind. Her mother had nearly lost balance that day, while Arasilla simply kept eating. Because she had once been so firm about staying single, the sudden announcement left everyone confused. Her mother immediately suspected she must have gotten herself into trouble. Her father, sweating anxiously, muttered that Arasilla must still have her head in the clouds, but she insisted that her mind was clear, and she wasn't in trouble. Her words enraged her mother more, and it took the intervention of her dad to calm her. Her sister, Iris Hugo, who had been listening quietly, asked why she had suddenly decided to marry. Arasilla only stared back at her with her hand near her mouth. Iris added that she was becoming worried and wanted to make sure her sister wasn't hiding anything serious. Arasilla hesitated, unable to reveal the truth. She could not tell them that she intended to marry for Iris's sake. There was only one real reason behind her decision. She was trying to prevent Iris's death. Arasilla carried a secret she had never shared with anyone, not even those she loved most. She had prophetic dreams. Breaking into a cold sweat at the memory, she recalled that her first prophetic dream in 5 years had shown Iris dying as a sacrifice in an arranged marriage. In that vision, Iris had been locked inside a cage, looking exhausted and pale. Arasilla had apologized for arriving late, rushing toward her. Iris had stood up weakly, relieved that Arasilla had come. But the moment their hands touched, Arasilla burst into tears, admitting she couldn't get her out. Iris, looking down with guilt, had blamed her own ignorance. Arasilla, trembling, insisted Iris had done nothing wrong and shouted that her sister's husband was the true culprit. She had bent down toward the cage and demanded how he could even consider treason. By then, 2 guards had appeared behind her. She asked Iris why she was the one suffering for her husband's crime, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Iris had explained that if not for the will and testament, Captain Vandermeer would have inherited the duchy instead of her husband. Arasilla had immediately asked if the issue involved the scoundrel's younger brother. Iris confirmed it, adding that after her marriage, she discovered her husband and his brother were fiercely competing for succession. Arasilla remembered that Sir Demian served as captain of the Order of the Red Hawk. This was something he was capable of. Suddenly, Iris began coughing violently. Arasilla screamed in panic and asked if she was all right. Seeing blood on her hand, Iris made a final request. She asked Arasilla to tell their parents and younger brother that she was sorry. Arasilla trembled as tears filled her eyes. Iris smiled sadly and said she would leave the family to Arasilla. A few days later in the dream, Iris was executed as the wife of a traitor. When the news spread, Arasilla sat in a chair, anger boiling inside her. At that moment, she believed she should have been the one. She should have been the one to marry instead. Back in the present, Arasilla faced her sister and could only sigh. She couldn't use her prophetic dream as evidence, no matter how much she wished she could. Iris leaned closer and quietly asked whether Arasilla had been meeting the knight in secret. Arasilla immediately denied it, insisting she barely remembered his name and had never even seen his face. Iris only stared at her in confusion, unable to understand why Arasilla would suddenly choose to marry. Their mother, growing increasingly alarmed, ordered someone to summon the physician. Her daughter was clearly going mad. Arasilla quickly shouted for them to stop and glared at her parents. demanding to know whether they hadn't already agreed to an arranged marriage with the Vandermeer household. Her parents shrieked in disbelief at how she had found out. Arasilla simply smiled and said she would soon meet the knight, so they should allow her to marry, then turned to walk away as she bid them goodbye. Her mother nearly fainted, her father supporting her while Iris stood speechless. As Arasilla walked toward her room, she reminded herself that she couldn't really blame her parents for hiding the arranged marriage. She would have struggled to bring it up as well. The dream was still vivid in her mind. Her sister's wedding taking place under pouring rain, Iris looking solemn as she stepped toward a fate she didn't want. She remembered the unpleasant Vandermeers and the audacity of proposing a marriage of convenience solely to decide who would inherit the ducal title. The idea that they would exploit Iris for their petty succession battle made Arasilla burn with anger. She burst into her room and headed straight for her writing desk. Since the marriage arrangement was already moving forward and could not be stopped, she refused to let her sister become the bride of the bastard eldest son. That left her with only one option. She had to get married first. She began scribbling down her letter, knowing that it would help prevent Iris's death. But it still wouldn't be enough. The guilt she felt over the dream, watching Iris die such a miserable death, left a weight she couldn't ignore. That was why she intended to marry the younger brother, Demian, instead. Smirking to herself, she resolved to overturn the brothers' power struggle entirely. She finished writing her letter, folded it neatly, and prepared it to be sent out. Meanwhile, at Sir Demian's estate, his assistant announced that an urgent letter had arrived and been placed on his desk. Moments later, Demian picked up the sealed envelope. He was immediately surprised to see Arasilla Hugo's name written on it. Opening it with little enthusiasm, he read her message. She stated that they would likely need to marry soon and should meet before the ceremony. She mentioned that she had something important to discuss and asked him to choose a suitable meeting time. She added that she would be available after 3 days. Demian stared at the letter without emotion, then tossed it straight into the fire. He muttered inwardly that not a single mage possessed a clear mind and wished never to be associated with her at all. After only a few seconds of reading, he already knew he would never involve himself with Arasilla Hugo. At least, that was what Demian had assumed. As he stepped outside, he found Arasilla standing at the gate, wearing a warm smile. She introduced herself and explained that she had come personally because he hadn't responded to her letter. She even remarked, lightly, that she had been worried he might have injured his delicate hands. Her cheerful tone only made Demian conclude that she was even more absurd than he had imagined. Inwardly, Arasilla groaned, wondering what gave him the audacity to ignore her letter, but outwardly she maintained a radiant smile. And so, Demian's resistance lasted only 3 days. To understand how this happened, let's rewind 5 minutes before Demian was forced to concede. At the Red Hawks training grounds, the knights were whispering amongst themselves instead of practicing. When the vice captain, Isaac Wind, arrived and questioned their idleness, one of the knights informed him that a young lady had appeared on the grounds. Isaac was startled by the report, until a polite greeting reached his ears. He turned and saw Arasilla approaching. She informed him that she was looking for Captain Vandermeer and asked if he knew where the captain was, noting that she had already written to him beforehand. Isaac found himself staring, struck by her beauty, and stuttered out that the captain had not yet arrived. He asked who she was. Arasilla introduced herself as Arasilla Hugo, and with full confidence described herself as the Empire's most brilliant mage. The title left Isaac stunned. A mage? And the knights around them began murmuring, wondering what gave her the nerve to traipse onto their training ground, but Arasilla's expression remained firm and composed. Isaac stepped forward, bowed politely, and informed her that her presence was disrupting the knights' training. Before he could finish, Arasilla cut in, remarking that the captain was likely taking an afternoon nap while handing off his duties to subordinates. She declared smugly that his superior must be quite the indolent man. Isaac stiffened and warned her to refrain from insulting their captain. Arasilla simply laughed, asking whether he was offended, and added that her comments were mild compared to what the captain had done to force her to travel all that way. The knights clenched their teeth at her words. Before the tension could escalate, a commanding voice asked what was going on. Sir Demian entered the training grounds, and the knights immediately bowed their heads in respect. Arasilla stepped toward him, introduced herself, and explained that she had rushed over because he had never replied to her letter. She even mentioned her concern that he might have injured his hand. Demian greeted her curtly and stated that his hand was fine. When she pressed him again, saying he had still ignored her letter, he could only stare at her, at a loss for words. He called Isaac forward and ordered 50 laps around the grounds as punishment for the disruption. Isaac apologized and quickly led the knights away. Demian then told Arasilla that they could speak in his office and guided her there. That was how the soon-to-be betrothed couple met for the first time, each forming immediate judgments. Arasilla thought she had never encountered a bigger snob, while Demian believed he had never met someone so disconnected from reality. Once seated for coffee in his office, Demian apologized for not responding to her letter, explaining that he had been too busy and had simply forgotten. Arasilla laughed lightly and said she understood, remarking that poor memory could happen to anyone. Demian then stated plainly that if she had come because of the letter, she should return home. He had no intention of marrying her. Arasilla asked whether he was aware that their families had agreed to a marriage of convenience. Demian said it was the first he had heard of it. She explained that she had only recently learned of the arrangement herself, and because of that promise, they had no choice but to marry. Demian immediately refused. Arasilla frowned, insisting he couldn't just reject it and warning that the situation was far more complicated than he realized. Then she glared at Demian and demanded to know why he was refusing the marriage. She began listing her qualifications, stating that she possessed exceptional strength and had received the highest public service award for defeating a horde of southern monsters at the end of the previous year. She added that she was the most promising candidate to become the next head of the Magic Tower, and, with a relaxed confidence, mentioned her own breathtaking beauty. Demian, however, stared at her with complete disinterest. Noticing his lack of reaction, she continued, asserting that above all else, he desired to defeat his brother and claim the title of Duke. Demian flinched at the remark, eyes widening in shock as he wondered how she could possibly know such a thing. Arasilla simply smiled and claimed she intended to help him. Instead of addressing her offer, Demian accused her of being the shameless mage who had taken credit for the knight's achievements during the previous year's monster expedition. Arasilla pointed at herself in disbelief, stunned that he would accuse her of shamelessness after she had saved him and his men from certain death. Demian countered by implying that she had arrived only at the end to take the credit after using the knights as bait to test the danger. She erupted in anger, questioning how he could dare say such a thing. A cup clattered loudly against the table as she furiously declared that they were all ingrates. Demian smirked, remarking that it was amusing to hear such words from a mage who couldn't even control her emotions. The two locked eyes, tension rising between them. Their discussion was moments away from turning into a formal duel when the door burst open. A young girl rushed in, grabbed Arasilla's hand, and reminded her of her promise not to hurt anyone. It was Audrey, Arasilla's lady-in-waiting. Arasilla complained loudly that the arrogant knight refused to thank the very person who had saved his life, insisting that he deserved to be taught a lesson. Audrey clung to her, urging her to save that lesson for another time. Demian then told Audrey not to presumptuously interfere in her master's affairs. Arasilla immediately snapped back, saying he had no right to presumptuously command her maid. That was the breaking point. She angrily pointed her umbrella at him, declaring that she would make him regret his insolence. Demian calmly sipped from his cup and advised her to stay out of his family's matters, unless she wished to regret becoming involved. He added that he did not need her help. Arasilla retorted that he was mistaken. His inheritance was on the line in this political marriage. Demian stared at her, stunned. She explained that his grandfather had left behind a will stating that whichever grandson married the Hugo family's granddaughter would inherit both the ducal title and the Vandermeer fortune. Demian, still in disbelief, said he didn't understand. Arasilla clarified that the agreement had been made in front of His Majesty the Emperor. If he doubted her words, she encouraged him to verify the truth himself. She then declared that she was finished with the conversation and that the final decision rested with him, then stormed out with Audrey. Demian remained seated, frozen. A political marriage linked directly to inheritance? His grandfather had arranged such a condition? If Arasilla's claims were real, then he might truly be required to marry the absurd mage. Holding his head in his hands, he realized he needed to investigate the matter himself. Whoa, that was tense. Arasilla left Demian's estate fuming, convinced that if Audrey hadn't intervened, she would have taught him a proper lesson. Still burning with indignation, she returned home. When she arrived, she found Iris waiting outside the estate. Arasilla asked why her sister had come all the way out, trying to hide her agitation behind a sheepish smile, only for a loud sniffle to erupt from behind Iris. The sound belonged to Adrian Hugo, the heir of House Hugo. Arasilla, upon seeing Adrian crying, burst into laughter and remarked that he looked ugly when he cried. Iris tugged playfully at Arasilla's cheeks to stop her teasing, but Arasilla continued laughing as she approached Adrian. She apologized to him and asked why he was crying. Adrian choked out that he had heard rumors of her impending marriage. Between sobs, he explained that their mother had told him she would move out with her new husband, and he begged her to cancel the wedding. Arasilla leaned her cheek against her hand and gave him a half-hearted yes, followed immediately by a firm no. Iris stepped closer at once, clearly sensing mischief, but Arasilla insisted she was telling the truth rather than teasing him. Adrian only cried louder until Arasilla finally wiped his tears and assured him that marriage did not mean she would disappear from his life. She reminded him that she would always remain his second older sister. Iris supported the sentiment, saying that the Hugo siblings would remain bound together until death. Even if marriage changed their surnames, their roots would remain the same. Adrian nodded with a smile, but then suddenly shouted again that he didn't want her to marry. He claimed to despise Sir Demian, prompting Arasilla to explain that rejecting the marriage would force her into marrying someone she disliked even more. Iris questioned what she meant by the statement, but Arasilla hesitated, breaking into a nervous sweat. When Iris asked whether she was marrying Sir Demian out of convenience, Arasilla denied it, insisting there was nothing of the sort driving her decision. Iris crouched beside her and gently reminded her that since her dream was to become head of the Magic Tower, she urged Arasilla not to sacrifice her ambitions or participate in a political marriage at the expense of her own happiness, and assured her that she could always rely on her. But Arasilla, haunted by the vision she had once seen, of Iris weak, pale, and suffering, felt her stomach tighten. She abruptly rose and claimed that her choice had nothing to do with convenience, adding with forced nonchalance that she liked Demian. Iris immediately doubted her sincerity, noting that Arasilla had never taken interest in anyone without cause. Feeling cornered, Arasilla shamelessly tried to convince her by claiming to have fallen for the knight's handsome face. Iris responded in shock and asked if she really liked him because of his face, while Adrian told her it wasn't like her. Arasilla, irritated, demanded to know whether she was not allowed to choose a man based solely on appearance despite having everything else in life. Iris retorted that Arasilla never believed in other people's appearance because she believed her face was perfect enough. Realizing she needed to steer the situation quickly, Arasilla calmed herself and declared that this time was an exception. She insisted that she and Sir Demian were soon to enter a loving union. Iris countered by reminding her that she had recently claimed not to remember his name or face. Her expression grew even more skeptical. Panicking, Arasilla waved dismissively and said that Sir Demian had promised to write to her, explaining that she needed to go and wait for the postman. Ignoring Iris calling after her, she fled the conversation. Adrian then asked Iris whether the marriage was truly happening, but Iris could not say for certain. As Arasilla hurried away, she felt she had done everything she could to maintain her cover. All she could hope for now was that the infuriating Demian Vandermeer would accept her proposal. She could not afford to arouse any further suspicion from Iris, but to her dismay, an entire week passed without a single response from Demian. A week after ignoring Arasilla's letter, Demian sat in his office looking utterly exhausted. He still struggled to believe that the mage had told him the truth. He wondered what his grandfather had been thinking when drafting such a will, especially when the Vandermeer family had been working tirelessly to remove him from the bloodline. It became clear that everyone in the household had known about the will except for him, because they intended to hand the title and fortune to his incompetent half-brother, Oscar Vandermeer. As Demian considered the situation, he recalled Arasilla's earlier remark about his desire to overthrow his brother and claim the ducal title. That thought made him sit upright and reach for paper. He began to draft a letter while reasoning through the implications. The marriage had been established as an imperial command, an order no one in the entire empire could disobey. If he accepted the match and married the mage, the entirety of House Vandermeer would inevitably fall into his hands. He smirked to himself as he held the completed letter. For the first time, he entertained the possibility that the mage might not be as foolish as he once assumed. Later that night, Audrey arrived to deliver Sir Demian's letter to Arasilla. Arasilla welcomed the letter warmly, smiling with such softness that Audrey briefly wondered if the two were secretly courting. She smiled, wiping a tear from her eye as it dawned on her that her troublemaker lady was all grown. But as soon as Arasilla opened the letter, all warmth vanished. She clenched her teeth in frustration, and when Audrey asked what was wrong, Arasilla turned sharply and tore the letter in half, shouting that she refused to let the arrogant knight get away with such insolence. Alarmed, Audrey tried to calm her and asked what the letter contained. Arasilla handed her the torn pieces, and Audrey carefully pieced them together. The letter simply stated that he would meet her the next day at 3 o'clock at Farang Coffee House, where they would continue the discussion they had begun in his office. Audrey let out a small laugh, but Arasilla grew even angrier. She could not believe he had kept her waiting an entire week only to dictate the time and place as though everything were solely at his convenience. She questioned whether the man possessed any sense of shame. Audrey tried to soothe her, but Arasilla continued ranting that what irritated her even more was his choice to present himself as a knight captain rather than as a member of House Vandermeer. Audrey admitted the detail was strange. Most people preferred to sign with their noble family name. Arasilla dismissed the thought and insisted instead that his behavior was the result of an inflated ego. To her, he was nothing but an arrogant bastard. Still fuming, she stormed over to her desk and began scribbling a response. She would make it clear who he was dealing with. She then thrust the finished letter into Audrey's hands, instructing her to deliver it to Sir Demian. The moment Audrey read it, she found that Arasilla had written that she would be seeing him at 5 o'clock that same day, signing it off with, "From Arasilla Hugo, Magic Tower Mage." Audrey could only sigh, concluding that both parties were terribly immature. After wishing Arasilla goodnight and leaving, Audrey disappeared down the hall. Arasilla turned toward her mirror and let out a loud huff. To her, Demian was unbearably haughty. What she did not know was that Demian too had been thinking about her, mostly about how uncanny she was. Once he secured what he wanted, he fully intended to divorce her. But Arasilla had reached a similar conclusion. From her perspective, she would also divorce him once she achieved her goal. The next day, Arasilla was at the Magic Tower, overseeing the research work her juniors were conducting. She stood before the floating oars, suspended midair, and remarked that she wished they hovered a little higher. Her female junior, Sally, responded with some disappointment, explaining that achieving natural levitation without the use of magic was extremely difficult. Rudy, their male junior, added that he would try experimenting with ways to reduce the weight of the oars. Arasilla, brightening with sudden enthusiasm, suggested that the floating oars likely needed to absorb mana and encouraged them to test different combinations of raw stones to be inserted into the oars. Rudy immediately scribbled down her thoughts, while Sally, energized by the idea, said they would resume research right away. When Arasilla glanced toward the clock and noticed that it was nearly 5 o'clock, she turned toward the door and instructed them to leave a report on her desk the following morning. Sally, surprised, asked if she was leaving already. Arasilla simply walked out, stating that she had someone to meet. After she left, Sally commented to Rudy that it had been a long time since Arasilla had left work this early, and Rudy agreed. Sally then wondered who Arasilla could be meeting that made her rush out so quickly. Arasilla met up with Audrey and they rode to the meetup point. Audrey reminded her that they were supposed to meet up an hour earlier, and she apologized, saying she was having too much fun researching floating oars, then signaled for the coachman to go faster. As Arasilla approached the entrance of Foreign Coffee with clear excitement, Audrey intercepted her. Audrey expressed concern that since it was Arasilla's first date with the captain, even a nice gown might not be enough preparation with how tattered she appeared. Arasilla dismissed her worries, insisting she looked good enough for him regardless of what she wore. Audrey then urged her to at least tie her hair, but Arasilla brushed past her, declaring she would enter on her own. She pushed the door open with unnecessary force, ignoring Audrey's attempt to stop her. The door closed behind her with an equally loud thud, leaving Audrey to sigh and quietly pray that the afternoon would end without bloodshed. Inside, Arasilla approached Demian with a smile, but he simply lifted his cup and, with a deep scowl, pointed out that she was 3 minutes late. She shot back, saying that 3 minutes was nothing compared to how long she had to wait for his reply. She stared at him, irritated that he had shown up in his full night uniform, forgetting she herself had also come in her mage attire. He smirked and gestured for her to order a drink. Her patience snapped. She loudly objected to being ordered around. A short while later, a cup of coffee was set before her, and she took her seat across from Demian once the server left. She huffed in annoyance and noted that he had insisted he did not need her. Yet all signs now suggested he had changed his mind. Demian, at first silent, finally lowered his head and acknowledged that he required her assistance after all. The admission caught her off guard. She had expected him to put up a bigger fight. But his next words surprised her even more. He proposed that they form a deal and asked what she hoped to gain from the marriage. Arasilla stated that she had two conditions. First, that her sister would not marry into House Vandermeer, and second, that the two of them would divorce once all obligations were accomplished. Demian accepted both terms without hesitation, adding that he had no intention of starting a family in the first place. He then listed his own proposed conditions. There were to be no children during the marriage, no unnecessary contact, and mutual cooperation toward each other's goals, among several other stipulations. After outlining everything, he asked whether she had any objections. Arasilla smiled and agreed to all the terms, adding that they should draft a prenuptial agreement and have it notarized at the temple. Demian found the idea reasonable. Outside, Audrey peeked through the door, unable to hear the conversation but could only hope that things were going great. Arasilla went on to inform Demian that she had already notified her family about the marriage. In response, Demian insisted that they keep the matter secret from House Vandermeer until the ceremony itself. His request surprised her, and she asked him why such secrecy was necessary. He explained that the entire household supported his older brother as the next duke, and that if they learned of the marriage, they would do everything possible to prevent it. Arasilla then asked whether his brother had a strong claim to the title. Demian clarified that his brother's mother was the current duchess, while his own mother had passed away. Arasilla sighed inwardly, realizing the older brother's mother must be the duke's second wife. It was, she thought, an extremely complicated family. She then suggested that they use their brains. When Demian asked what she meant, she told him that the crown prince would soon be hosting an imperial ball. Every young and prominent noble in the empire would be attending. With growing excitement, she proposed that they announce their marriage at the event. Demian stared at her in disbelief, a bead of sweat running down his forehead. Believing he had not understood, she repeated the plan, only for him to react with alarm. He fully understood the idea, but feared that if anything went wrong, his family would blame him for ruining the crown prince's ball. Arasilla simply smiled and insisted that it would not be a problem, revealing that the crown prince happened to be one of her few friends. Demian folded his arms, silently questioning whether she truly had friends at all. She then argued that instead of hiding their marriage, they should make it impossible for his family to interfere. Reluctantly, he agreed. As they prepared to leave, Arasilla extended her hand to him, suggesting they finalize their plans some other time, adding that she looked forward to working together. He simply walked past her and reminded her of his second condition: no unnecessary physical contact. He even questioned whether she suffered from short-term memory loss. Arasilla's thoughts immediately flashed back to the moment she had teased him about his own memory, and she trembled with irritation. Outside, Audrey assumed Arasilla was enjoying her first date. But Demian suddenly exited the shop alone, leaving Audrey confused. Moments later, Arasilla came storming out, visibly furious and determined to make Demian pay for whatever offense he had just committed. When Audrey asked what happened, Arasilla dismissed the question and stated that they needed to go. When Audrey asked where, Arasilla announced she needed a dress for the imperial ball the following week. The news delighted Audrey. Arasilla was finally going to wear a dress. Meanwhile, Arasilla's anger continued to smolder. Once they reached the carriage, Arasilla took charge. She told the coachman that she would be taking the reins and instructed him to sit inside. Although startled, he obeyed after Audrey reassured him. Arasilla then mounted the front seat, seized the reins, and urged the horse forward with excessive force. The sudden jolt sent both Audrey and the coachman bouncing inside the carriage. Overcome with vengeful energy, Arasilla raced forward with reckless determination, shouting her intention to exact revenge as she charged forward. On the day of the imperial ball, Arasilla prepared herself as Audrey excitedly styled her hair. Iris came into her room and asked if she truly intended to announce her marriage that day. to which Arasilla ferociously replied that she planned for the engagement news to appear on the front page of every newspaper the next day. Iris, sitting on the bed, asked whether the crown prince had approved, and Arasilla assured her that Frederick, her best friend, had no objections. Frederick, the Empire's second prince and Arasilla's academy companion, had outperformed the first prince and become heir to the throne due to his combat skill, gentle personality, and eloquence. Audrey, humming nervously, revealed her concern over Sir Demian's popularity, prompting Arasilla to demand clarification. Iris explained that Demian was the dream of every noblewoman: handsome, highly skilled, educated abroad at a young age, and the kingdom's youngest swordmaster, known as Hellbound Demian. Marrying him would inevitably create enemies among the high society ladies. Arasilla, however, showed indifference, scratching her ear in her usual nonchalant manner. Iris, recognizing this expression, grasped her sister's hand and urged her to promise not to cause trouble after the announcement. Arasilla agreed immediately, and Iris knew that her sister was, in fact, going to cause more trouble. She never listens to her. At Cetron Imperial Palace, the Grand Hall buzzed with chatter, and food was arranged in meticulous order. When the Hugo sisters entered, a wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Arasilla scanned the room, smirking at the grandeur and anticipating the high society gossip that was already beginning. Rumors circulated about whether the men would wish to dance with the sisters or desired more than their beauty, which only amused Arasilla further. At that moment, Iris held her sister's hand and urged her to look forward, and when she did, her gaze fell on Demian, who stood with an aura of calm authority. The ladies in the hall began to gasp at his presence. He was like a walking statue, absolutely charming. Demian approached and greeted her formally, prompting Arasilla to smile and respond politely. The ladies couldn't believe that he approached her. They wondered how they knew each other in the first place. Demian leaned forward, whispering that he had been waiting for her. Arasilla smiled back. She said she had been looking forward to seeing him again. Little did he know that this was all part of her revenge plan. Murmurs intensified as the nobles speculated about a potential romantic involvement, and all attention centered on the two of them. And then it was time. Arasilla extended her hand to Demian, requesting a dance, eliciting gasps from the crowd. Demian, recalling their agreement of no unnecessary contact, initially resisted, though Arasilla's smirk revealed that she was daring him to refuse. The onlookers noted that a true gentleman would not decline such an offer, forcing Demian to accept. He escorted her to the dance floor while Iris observed, convinced that the two were in love. Together, Arasilla and Demian successfully deceived the assembly, maintaining a convincing performance throughout the dance. During the dance, Demian asked when she planned to make the announcement. Arasilla stated that it would occur after the song ended. Demian, visibly annoyed, inquired if she was that eager for revenge. Arasilla suggested that his frown made it appear as if he wished to pick up a fight with her, though he explained that he was simply not fond of dancing. As the song concluded, the Imperial announcer directed everyone's attention to Lady Arasilla Hugo for an important announcement, acting under the orders of the Crown Prince. They had everyone's attention. They were all curious to know what the announcement was all about. Demian stood in silence, wondering what he was meant to do. Before he could decide, Arasilla declared that she was to be married to Sir Demian Vandermeer and that invitations would be sent soon, encouraging everyone to attend. The announcement elicited simultaneous gasps from the audience. Arasilla, still smiling, waved and suggested that the attendees return to enjoying the party. Demian, meanwhile, appeared shocked, anticipating that she might offer further explanation. At that moment, Frederick, the Crown Prince, approached, bowing to her and requesting an immediate elaboration on what she had meant by getting married. The story then shifted back 7 years, to the Academy's entrance ceremony. Frederick had stood alone, having lost his way, and was on the verge of arriving late. At that moment, a girl passed by, and he called out to ask if she knew where the entrance ceremony was being held. The girl, Arasilla, turned and pointed him in the right direction. However, Frederick became momentarily distracted, unable to look away from her. He was struck by how beautiful she seemed, and from that instant he fell in love with her at first sight. Thus, hearing Arasilla announce her marriage at the Imperial Ball shattered him. For 7 years, the Crown Prince had quietly endured a tragic, unrequited love. Overtaken by shock, he rushed toward her and asked her to clarify what she meant by saying she was getting married. Arasilla appeared startled by his reaction, and he raised his voice, insisting that she had never mentioned any engagement to him. The crowd quickly realized that the speaker was the crown prince, and they all bowed, snapping him out of his emotional outburst. Embarrassed, he realized he had forgotten he was standing before the public, and to think they heard him say something so disgraceful. Arasilla then addressed him gently, suggesting they speak somewhere private. Outside, she told him it seemed unlike him to lose composure, since she believed he always had to maintain the perfect image of a crown prince. Frederick admitted that her sudden announcement had caught him off guard, then questioned whether she was truly betrothed, considering she was a mage and Demian a knight. She replied that she saw no issue with it. Frederick then explained that he had always thought she disliked the idea of marriage, but Arasilla replied that Demian had changed her mind. Frederick, staring at her, asked if she remembered the promise they once made in the academy library as first-year students. The agreement that if neither of them were married by 40, they would marry each other. To him, that moment had felt like a genuine marriage promise. Arasilla, stunned, asked how she could remember something from 7 years ago. He accused her of swearing she would marry him, but she explained that she had assumed he was joking and had simply played along, never imagining he had taken her response seriously. He pressed further, asking how she could make such a major announcement without warning, and whether she understood how much he cared for her. Arasilla responded softly, acknowledging that she knew he cared for her as a friend and apologized if her actions had hurt him. She explained that she had considered the marriage carefully before announcing it, and hoped he would respect her choice. He stayed silent for a moment, then asked her to forgive him before walking away in anger. Arasilla watched him leave, puzzled over why he seemed so upset. Meanwhile, all this time, Demian watched from a balcony above them, observing everything that transpired. The day after the surprise-filled Imperial Ball, news of Arasilla and Demian's engagement spread rapidly across the Empire. At the Hugo Manor, Arasilla asked Demian if he was prepared for what awaited him. He admitted he was not, and accused her of sending a letter the previous night informing him that he would be meeting her family, wondering aloud if she had lost her mind. Arasilla only responded with a smug smile, insisting that the sooner they handled it, the better. When he asked if there was anything he needed to know beforehand, she simply winked and told him to prepare himself to take the lovely second daughter's hand in marriage. As they approached the entrance of the manor, Arasilla's father allegedly welcomed Demian, though his expression suggested the opposite. Father and son stood guarding the doorway with stern faces, and to Demian they looked as though they intended to devour him on sight. Arasilla's mother soon emerged to offer a polite greeting, and Demian bowed respectfully to both parents. Before the atmosphere could settle, Adrian stepped in front of Arasilla and declared that he would not allow Demian to marry her, shocking everyone. He made it clear that he wasn't letting him take Arasilla from them. Iris attempted to calm him, but he continued loudly, arguing that his sister was far too young to marry. He even insisted that he didn't care whether Demian was the Empire's youngest swordsman or the world's greatest monster conqueror, prompting Arasilla to wonder how Adrian had gathered so much information about Demian. Demian addressed Adrian directly, crouching down to meet him at eye level. Leaning close, he informed the boy that even if a knife were pressed to his throat, he would still marry Arasilla, and asked whether Adrian planned to stand in his way after hearing that. Terrified, Adrian trembled violently before running to cling to his mother, crying uncontrollably. Arasilla's father watched in stunned silence. When Arasilla confronted Demian in disbelief, he reminded her that she had told him to prepare himself to marry her. She responded that while she had said that, she had never suggested he should terrify her 11-year-old brother in the process. Later at the dining table, Arasilla's father stated that he wished to get straight to the point. He asked Demian why he wanted to marry Arasilla, explaining that he had heard it was not merely a marriage of convenience. Demian sighed and replied that Arasilla was undeniably the most unique person he had ever met, and that uniqueness was what made him fall for her. He added that a life with her would never be boring or frustrating. Her mother quickly cut in, demanding to know if that was his only reason, and pressed further by asking what he would do if he eventually became bored or exhausted. Demian responded that if such a day ever came, he would consult her ladyship and find a compromise suitable for her. Her mother, however, reminded him that marriage was a lifelong commitment to another person, which was why she needed to be certain that both parties were truly prepared to spend the rest of their lives together. The couple appeared visibly stunned when Arasilla's mother raised the question of whether they were truly prepared to spend the rest of their lives together. Their expressions suggested complete disinterest, which only made their mother tremble with frustration before scolding them that, if they were not ready, they should not be getting married at all. Demian quickly tried to recover by explaining that he only needed time to process such a distant future, while Arasilla added with a confident smile that they've already had deep conversations about this. Marriage represented the most important step in their lives as a couple. Demian nodded along nervously, clearly trying to match her certainty. Their mother reminded Demian that he should not expect Arasilla to behave like conventional wives. She emphasized that Arasilla's dream was to become head of the Magic Tower, and that he should not expect the impossible from her. Demian responded that he wasn't so inept to require his wife's assistance. He added that he had no intention of interfering with anything Arasilla wished to pursue after marriage, insisting that their lives would continue independently despite their union. His remark surprised her mother, who asked again if he truly had no intention of preventing Arasilla from working at the tower. Demian reaffirmed that he had no right to stop her, and that her decisions were entirely hers to make. The Hugo family was taken aback by his progressive stance. Since mages of the tower were already known for their conservative values, and knights were known to be even more traditional, Demian's declaration deeply warmed their hearts. Arasilla even signaled approval to him with a thumbs up. Her father, tearful, admitted that he had believed himself to be the only man worthy of his beloved daughter, but Demian had proven otherwise. Arasilla, unimpressed, reminded her father that Demian was not particularly extraordinary, and urged the family to put aside their concerns and support their marriage. Adrian began crying again, startling Iris, before announcing that he had a question for Demian. When given permission, he surprised everyone by asking whether Demian believed he possessed a coquettish charm. Arasilla choked on her drink while Demian stared speechlessly. Adrian continued, explaining that Arasilla liked winsome men. For context, Arasilla had once told Adrian that if a man wasn't cute and charming, then she wasn't interested, just to get him to act cute. He pleaded with Demian to display plenty of charm and take good care of her. Arasilla burst into laughter, while Demian remained stunned. With Adrian's final remark, Demian's introduction to the Hugo family concluded on a surprisingly peaceful note. Outside, Arasilla's father stopped Demian to speak privately. He extended his hand and entrusted Arasilla to Demian's care, admitting that he had hoped she would remain under his protection until she achieved her dreams. He acknowledged, however, that no child ever fully followed their parents' wishes. He asked only that Demian keep his promise to support Arasilla's aspirations. Demian shook his hand firmly and assured him that he would uphold that promise, and her father was visibly relieved. Arasilla then offered to escort Demian to his carriage. Adrian called for her to return immediately, and she promised she would, urging him to wait inside. As they walked, Demian remarked that Arasilla seemed to have grown up surrounded by abundant love. She enthusiastically confirmed this. He said it explained where she got her confidence. Arasilla objected, saying her confidence came from both her personality and her trust in her family's love. When she asked why he mentioned it, he just stood in silence. The comment brought him back to memories of his brother Oscar receiving all the affection while he lingered in the shadows. He explained that he merely wondered where her eccentric personality came from, which made Arasilla suspicious that he was insulting her. He ignored the remark and walked ahead until she stopped him again to ask whether she should meet his family as well. Demian explained that his household had undoubtedly reacted explosively to the marriage announcement and would likely travel to the capital soon, probably arriving 2 days later barring any delays. Arasilla accepted this and asked him to contact her when they were ready. As he climbed into the carriage, she asked if there was anything she needed to prepare for. With a mischievous grin, he told her only to prepare herself to marry the thorn in his family's side. He assured her he would write, then departed. Arasilla watched the carriage disappear, replaying his final words. A thorn in their side? She realized she would have to brace herself. Meanwhile, at the Vandermeer Manor that night, a glass shattered violently as someone screamed Demian's name. His stepmother, Sophie Vandermeer, raged that her cunning stepson dared attempt to covet her son's position and stir trouble, as if forgetting his station entirely. She swore never to forgive him for that. The maids trembled as the room descended into chaos. She gritted her teeth and ordered her carriage to be prepared immediately, declaring that it was time to pay her second son a long overdue visit. Arasilla arrived at Demian's manor looking tense, reminding herself that she was finally about to meet the Duke's family. She hoped for the best but prepared herself for the worst. As she approached the entrance, the butler greeted her and informed her that he would guide her to the drawing room. However, the moment they stepped inside, both of them froze in surprise. A young woman was storming past, loudly declaring that Demian was the most horrible man, and as she passed, she slammed her shoulder aggressively into Arasilla. The woman immediately rounded on Arasilla, accusing her of intentionally bumping into her. Arasilla, startled, looked down at her and remarked that she could barely see her from that height. Nora White, the eldest daughter of House White, was significantly shorter than her. Nora's anger spiked. She declared that she would not forgive Arasilla and accused her of always stealing the men she liked, insisting that Arasilla now thought she could make a fool of her. Arasilla was surprised. She didn't even know who she was. She was about to defend herself when both women turned at the sound of a stern voice addressing Nora by her full name. Demian had appeared. Arasilla rolled her eyes as she finally remembered the connection. House White had once lost a competition against House Hugo over a monostone mine, so their resentment ran deep. Nora attempted to approach Demian, but he warned her that any closer and he would resort to legal measures. Shockingly, she stopped immediately and accused him of being heartless. Arasilla noted with surprise how obedient Nora became around him. Nora then tearfully insisted that Demian surely knew how deeply she adored him. He dismissed her exaggerated affection, stating that he was well aware of her one-sided pursuit and instructed Mr. Chamberlain to escort her out. He then asked Arasilla to follow him. As Nora was dragged away, she vowed to come after Arasilla. Arasilla simply winked at her, inviting her to admire her beauty anytime she liked, which only made Nora scream louder in rage. Still processing the chaotic encounter, Arasilla asked Demian if he had invited Nora just to end up causing such a commotion. Demian clarified that Nora's visit had not been expected. Arasilla remarked sarcastically that it was a fantastic beginning to the family gathering, at least providing a spectacle before his relatives arrived. But Demian informed her that his family was already inside, startling her. She immediately asked if that meant they had been seen, but Demian assured her that they had narrowly escaped being noticed amid Nora's frenzy. Arasilla steadied herself and suggested that they proceed to the negotiations, but Demian halted her. He warned her that his family would do everything in their power to stop the marriage, as they were determined to ensure he inherited nothing from the Vandermeer household. He asked whether she was still willing to face them. Arasilla, surprised by the gravity of his words, questioned whether he expected her to retreat after everything they had endured. He clarified that it wasn't what he meant. She then smiled, stating that she was more concerned about him, and with firm resolve declared that she was equally determined to see the marriage through, no matter the circumstances. Her confidence gleamed as she reminded him that her willpower was not to be underestimated. When Arasilla entered the room, she composed herself with flawless grace, introduced her identity, and thanked the family for the invitation. She added that it was an honor to meet Demian's esteemed parents. Demian's father, Alex Vandermeer, stood by the window and asked if she was truly the woman intending to marry Demian. She confirmed it, and he observed her quietly. Demian's stepmother, Sophie Vandermeer, sitting with a coffee cup in hand, questioned why a woman known for advocating celibacy suddenly wanted to marry their son. She added that too many women had approached her sons with selfish intentions. Demian found her words insulting and outrageous. Arasilla, however, maintained perfect composure. She bowed, stated that she understood the concern, and brightly explained that she was marrying Demian purely for his appearance, claiming that it was rare to find someone whose beauty equaled her own and that she could not possibly pass up such a partnership. Both Demian and his stepmother were stunned. Sophie sharply reminded her that marriage was a serious matter and urged her to be prudent. But before Sophie finished, Arasilla respectfully interrupted, insisting that she was being prudent and elaborated confidently. As someone blessed with wealth, beauty, and talent, appearance naturally ranked at the top of her priorities. She even twirled lightly, stating that all she required was a beautiful face. She didn't care what the person was like on the inside. The entire family stared in disbelief, except Demian, who already knew she lived in her own whimsical reality. Sophie slammed her hand on the table, snapping Arasilla out of her world, and insisted she still could not approve the marriage, citing the incompatibility between a mage and a knight. Arasilla feigned shock, saying she'll be troubled if she opposed the marriage. Sophie grinned mischievously, wondering if that was enough to put her off. Arasilla then glowed again. She warned Sophie that continued opposition would only intensify the flames, shocking the Duke and his wife, who quickly asked her what she meant, and she told them dramatically that she was referring to her passion for beauty. She added that Demian would become the first piece of her collection, prompting Demian to sweat nervously. Sophie began to realize that Arasilla was not easily shaken. She had assumed Arasilla would abandon the engagement if her pride was bruised, but clearly Arasilla was an immovable force. The meeting continued with Arasilla's boldness overwhelming every objection. By the end, the Duke and Duchess were completely exhausted of resistance. Arasilla politely waved farewell as she climbed her carriage. Demian wished her a safe return and she thanked him. Before leaving, she leaned in close, causing him to flinch, and remarked that only the wedding ceremony remained. He smiled faintly as she boarded her carriage and departed. As he watched her leave, a cold voice behind him questioned whether he thought he could steal what belonged to Oscar by behaving this way. Sophie approached, trembling with anger, declaring that he was using Arasilla to mock the Vandermeer family. Demian simply smirked and turned away, provoking her rage. She shouted that he should not let the moment get to his head and screamed that he was nothing but a failure. This halted him. His expression hardened as he asked whether persistent effort could not eventually secure victory, especially if he adopted the same tactics she used, taking what belonged to others. Sophie's expression darkened and she trembled. Demian stated that he had matters to attend to and walked away, leaving her yelling his name. As he disappeared inside, Sophie's hands shook with fury. She compared him bitterly to his wretched mother, from his unyielding pride to his self-righteous bearing. Then she let out a low, malicious laugh. Very well, she thought. He could give everything he had. In the end, they would all witness who delivered the final blow, and who truly wins. After Arasilla and Demian concluded their difficult meetings with their families, the Vandermeer household requested a formal meeting with the Hugos. When both families gathered a few days later, the Duke made his intentions clear. Laid out on the table were heaps of extravagant jewelry, an obvious attempt at bribery. He offered Arasilla's parents immense wealth, promising them any business enterprise of their choice if they would abandon the marriage and hand Arasilla over to his first son, Oscar. Arasilla's father rejected the proposal without hesitation, stating that Demian, not Oscar, was the most suitable partner for his daughter. Sophie attempted to intervene, suggesting that perhaps Iris would be a better match for Oscar. She then tried to undermine Demian's character, emphasizing his reputation as a lifelong troublemaker and telling them that they had once been forced to send him abroad because of it. She questioned whether Arasilla's father genuinely wanted his daughter tied to such a man. He dismissed her remarks and reaffirmed his support for the marriage. Arasilla's mother added that they intended to honor their daughter's wishes and would not oppose the union. The Duke and his wife exchanged anxious glances, both realizing that their attempts were rapidly failing. A knock at the door interrupted the tension, and a messenger announced a letter from the Imperial Palace. Arasilla's mother seemed delighted, explaining that she had hoped the Vandermeers would be present to hear this. Since the marriage had been mandated by the Emperor himself, the palace had to be informed promptly. When the messenger handed over the letters, addressed to Arasilla's father and to the Duke as Arasilla's father-in-law, the Duke and Sophie shrieked in shock and dread. Moments later, while returning home in their carriage, Sophie fretted that if things continued this way, Demian might actually become the rightful heir to the Vandermeer household. The Duke didn't respond immediately. His mind drifted back to the day he had ordered Demian to be sent away. He remembered asking the boy for any final words, and Demian coldly called him a coward who hid behind a woman. That memory clearly unsettled him. Stroking his beard, the Duke concluded that he could never allow the marriage to happen. Calling to his wife, he instructed her to ensure that Arasilla was properly put in her place when she met her the next day, promising that he would manage the rest. The following day at the Magic Tower, Sally loudly demanded confirmation from Arasilla about her marriage. Arasilla confirmed it. She added that the wedding was taking place in a month. Sally immediately worried that Arasilla would leave the tower like many other female mages who quit after marriage. Arasilla reassured her that marriage meant nothing significant to her work, and that she had no intention of leaving. Rudy sighed in relief while Sally regained her excitement. A sudden knock startled them. When the visitor entered, Sally stood up in shock the moment she recognized the figure, prompting Arasilla to look up as well, and also leap to her feet. The head of the Magic Tower, Archmage Philip, had come personally. He explained that he had heard about her marriage and had hoped she would tell him herself. Arasilla laughed awkwardly and apologized, saying she had been busy. He invited her for coffee. Later in his office, the mood was much lighter. Philip reminisced about the day Arasilla had barged into his office with overwhelming boldness, declaring that she refused to marry and demanding that he name her as his successor. Arasilla laughed at the memory and clarified that her upcoming marriage was not a serious emotional union. She admitted openly that she and the knight each wanted something, and they planned to divorce once they achieved their goals. Philip wondered what that something might be, and then asked whether she recalled the incident involving a mage and knight who married in the past, the Ritterson case. Arasilla stiffened immediately. The Ritterson tragedy involved a mage who murdered her knight husband, causing chaos across the empire. Philip informed her that there were now rumors claiming that Arasilla was the mage's reincarnation. Outraged, she slammed her hand on the table and declared that she wanted those people to say it to her face. Philip only laughed at her reaction. Then, returning to a serious tone, he reminded her of how female mages had gradually lost influence after the Ritterson case, facing harsh scrutiny both inside and outside the tower. He asked whether whatever she hoped to gain from Demian was truly worth jeopardizing her future. She was totally lost for words at that moment. Her thoughts immediately went to her sister and brother. Clutching her dress tightly, she insisted that the sacrifice was worth far more than her future, and that she must marry. Philip accepted her determination and agreed to support her. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he asked whether something had happened with the Crown Prince Frederick. Arasilla was taken aback. Philip explained that the prince usually sent regular letters to the tower but had not written in some time. Arasilla's eyes widened. She had completely forgotten about Frederick. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, Prince Frederick read a letter from Arasilla in which she stated that she didn't want to lose her only friend before the wedding. He smiled faintly. It sounded exactly like her. But he couldn't understand why she was marrying a knight when she was someone who never did anything without a clear advantage. The situation felt too suspicious. He ordered his personal guard to investigate Demian thoroughly and to have someone follow Arasilla and report her every movement. As he pushed the letter aside, he silently resolved that he would not easily accept her marriage. The following day at Demian's manor, he appeared colder than ever as he reminded his stepmother, Sophie, that if she intended to meet someone, she should at least arrive on time. Sophie huffed in irritation and demanded to know why he was present, insisting she had not invited him. Arasilla, however, stepped in warmly, explaining that she had invited him, and that no one had specified she should come alone. Demian maintained his icy demeanor, warning Sophie that this would be their final meeting before the wedding ceremony. Sophie responded sharply, accusing him of having a natural talent for disappointing her every time he opened his mouth. He replied just as coldly, stating that the same could be said for a mother who only acknowledged her son when he disappointed her. Sensing that their exchange would escalate into a heated argument, Arasilla quickly intervened and asked Sophie the reason she had been summoned. Sophie gestured to a maid who handed Arasilla a book. Upon opening it, Arasilla realized it was the dowry list, filled with outrageously expensive accessories and gowns, an excessive amount of money, and even a magnificent new estate in the capital. She gasped in disbelief, stunned at how unreasonable the demands were, and immediately questioned why Sophie believed she needed an entirely new estate. Feigning innocence, Sophie explained that since Arasilla would be moving in with Demian after the marriage, the current manor belonged to the Vandermeers, and she simply wished to be compensated for it. Exhausted, Arasilla asked if they could reach a mutually acceptable amount instead. Demian stretched out a hand, asking to see the list, and Arasilla passed it to him. Sophie leaned back with a smirk, declaring that she would not settle for less regardless of his opinion. After reading through it, Demian tossed the book onto the table and curtly instructed her to cut the dowry in half. Outraged, Sophie yelled that she would never agree to that, but Demian informed her that he would be requesting an audience with the Emperor shortly. At that, Sophie immediately stiffened. Demian reminded her that since her unreasonable terms would cause conflict between the families, it made sense to involve someone who could resolve everything with a single command. Sophie's expression hardened, and she asked whether he was threatening her. Demian replied that he was merely offering her a choice, to let the problem escalate or allow it to resolve itself. With barely concealed hostility, Sophie countered by suggesting that Arasilla should move into the Vandermeer manor instead. Arasilla rejected the idea at once, explaining that she worked at the magic tower. Sophie stared at her in astonishment, questioning whether she truly intended to remain there after marriage and demanding to know who would take care of Demian if she didn't. She warned Arasilla that she might oppose the marriage again if that was her mindset. Arasilla calmly stated that she was not marrying Demian in order to be his supportive wife. Sophie, now even more confused, pressed her to explain, but then her expression shifted sharply, as though she had found a more insulting angle, and she coldly wondered aloud if Arasilla's so-called audacity came from her poor House Hugo upbringing. Arasilla flinched, clenching her fists. How dare Sophie insult her family? She responded that her family had taught her not to clean up after someone else's grown son and to speak her mind when an adult spoke nonsense. Sophie asked if she was implying that she was talking nonsense, and Arasilla innocently replied that she had said no such thing. Then smiled widely and added that if that was what it sounded like, she wondered who was truly to blame. Sophie grew even more furious, asking if Arasilla was making fun of her. Demian stepped in, stating that he and Arasilla would live in the capital. Sophie cut him off, insisting that as the lady of the house, it was her duty to teach sense to anyone joining the family. Demian glared at her, asking when she had ever treated him as family in the first place, then smirked, pointing out that she seemed to be admitting that both he and Arasilla were members of the Vandermeer household. If she didn't plan on training Arasilla to become the next lady of the house, she should stop pretending. Sophie clenched her fists, enraged. Was he truly asking her to acknowledge him as the Vandermeer heir? He had some nerves. Arasilla joined in with exaggerated delight, insisting that she had to follow Demian's wishes. It was, after all, the wife's duty to obey her husband. She even blew her a dramatic kiss. Sophie could hardly believe the audacity and warned Arasilla to wait until she tore that blabbering mouth apart. Demian rose to his feet, saying he would see her at the ceremony. Sophie exclaimed that she wasn't done speaking, but Arasilla also stood, cheerfully wishing her good health until the wedding day. Demian placed a hand lightly on Arasilla's back, saying he would escort her to her carriage. Arasilla paused in surprise. She had thought he wouldn't touch a lady without her permission. As they descended the stairs, Arasilla asked what they needed to prepare next. The wedding invitations, the wedding dress, or perhaps an evening gown. She also reminded Demian to inform her once the dowry issue had been settled. Demian replied calmly that she only needed to prepare half of what had been requested. He would take care of the rest himself. The reassurance filled Arasilla with delight. Demian then added that the only things left were completing their contract and submitting the marriage registration form. Arasilla suggested postponing that for now, explaining that she was currently tied up with work at the magic tower. Hearing this, Demian proposed that they visit the temple the day before instead, since he too was busy. Arasilla teased him lightly, saying she was certain his busy schedule involved swinging his large knife around. The remark clearly struck a nerve. Laughing mischievously, she darted away, calling out that she would stop by when she found time to help with the contract. As she ran, her foot caught on the hem of her dress. She stumbled, teetering on the edge of the stairs. Just before she could fall, Demian reached out and caught her. Arasilla turned to meet his gaze, relief flickering across her face. But just as she opened her mouth to thank him, he released his grip, and she dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Demian scolded her curtly, telling her to watch her step. She could have been seriously hurt. Arasilla muttered that she would be more careful, but he repeated his warning, his tone sharp. His jaw clenched as he added that they had no way of knowing what might happen before the wedding, or what those opposed to their union might be planning. He told her firmly to be careful, then turned and walked back upstairs, instructing a servant to escort her to her carriage. Arasilla called after him, but he did not turn back. As she watched him leave, unease settled in her chest. Something about him felt off. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was unusually tense, and she wondered why. And that's where this chapter ends. With tension rising and hidden threats closing in, it's clear the path to their wedding won't be smooth. What is Demian really worried about? And what dangers are waiting before the big day? If you enjoyed the recap, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment to let us know what you think. See you in the next one.